In 2006, a movie about fashion came out that uncovered the industry in a way both entertaining and aesthetically sharp. It became a cult favorite almost immediately and quickly drew serious opposition from the very world it depicted. Brands, designers, and venues refused to sponsor it. The real figure it was widely understood to be based on kept her distant, insisting the whole thing was harmless entertainment. The fashion world, in other words, wanted nothing to do with it. 20 years later, the sequel arrives to a completely different reception. The budget doubled, everyone wants it. Because somewhere along the way, the industry figured out what the rest of us already knew. The original wasn't a takedown, it was a portrait. I haven't seen the sequel yet, so instead of pretending I can speak to it, let's go back to the first one and explore what actually made it an icon. Not as a perfect portrait of the fashion industry, because frankly, it's not that, but as a film that understands fashion enough to create a bigger conversation. Welcome back to Fashion Anthology. This is where I talk and discuss fashion, and without any further ado, let's begin.
Are you wearing the
The Chanel boots? Yeah, I am.
When we talk about fashion movie, of course, the first thing we need to discuss is the fashion itself. Like any other movie, fashion plays an essential role contributing to the story. For this particular one, it is this movie. The stylings make a clear argument from the very first scene. That opening montage of women getting ready for work establishes the world that doesn't require any words. There's the runway world, and there's everything else. Andy stands out immediately, not just because she is poorly dressed, but also because she is dressed for a different reality entirely. As the film progresses, the clothes are clear evidence of her transformation into the world of fashion. The styling is making visible what's happening underneath the surface. Did you know that the film has struggled to get brand sponsorship? Major houses wanted nothing to do with it. Surprisingly, that limitation ended up being one of its greatest strengths. Without the obligation to showcase recognizable luxury labels too much, the costume team was free to build something more interesting. A whole wardrobe built around niche and smaller brands at the time, such as Rick Owens, Vivienne Westwood, Jean Paul Gaultier, Igor Azarel, Rebecca Taylor, and Mountie. This kind of feel like a statement was made right there. People who truly understand fashion care about quality and individuality, not the name tag or logo. Runway doesn't follow trends, it sets them. The lack of sponsorship actually made the film fashion more credible. But the real deal here is no other than the silhouettes, and this is where the film earns its authority. All four central figures are built on classic silhouettes, structured, cleaned, precise. Each one wears the foundation differently, and those differences tell you everything about who they are. Miranda represents power, luxury, and edge. She showed up with fur coats, statement bags, a near uniform formula, always with heels. Her accessories were mainly oversized sunglasses and hoop earrings, and they acted as a focal point of the outfit. The notable thing is her consistency. Everyone around her experiments, adjusts, tries things on. Miranda simply doesn't want to change. She doesn't need to impress anyone, and her wardrobe communicates exactly that. It doesn't ask anything of you, it simply expects compliance. As Nigel said it,
her opinion is the only one that matters.
meanwhile, Andy played with more lightness, chic, curious, a little playful. It makes sense for someone who's just starting out with fashion. She experiments with patterns and accessory while staying grounded, and her makeup follows the same logic, mostly natural, with that recurring red lips as punctuation. She is trying things on in every sense. Different from Andy, Emily pushes further avant garde and unpredictable. She brings different silhouettes, different hair, different makeup every time she makes an appearance. The consistency isn't in the look itself, but the energy, always deliberate and bold. She doesn't just wear clothes, she is making her statement. And then there's Nigel, full of restrained, muted, and almost invisible by runway standards. Even so, his creativity and wit still shine through the way he uses patterns or being playful with the ties. I think this is intentional. He represents the people on the production side, where creativity goes into the work rather than the wardrobe. Anyone who spent time watching behind the scenes fashion documentary know this is true. What ties them all together is that classic silhouette, the same foundation fashion itself grows from. Even the most acclaimed and out-of-the-box designers like Rei Kawakubo, Yoichi Yamamoto, and Rick Owens use the classics as their launching point to explore complex ideas. Using a palette of black, white, and earthy tones, the result is a visual language of quiet authority that separates runway from everyone else and earns the audience trust in that hierarchy, almost without anyone really realizing it. Most of the styling blends what was trending in the 2000s with what is classic, and fashion circle back often enough that dated is usually a temporary condition. With Y2K and 90s aesthetic fully back in circulation, I think we can hold on trend a little more loosely than we tend to. The fashion here works because it served two audiences at once, accessible enough for a general crowd, but also layered enough for anyone who actually cares about clothes and fashion. That balance is genuinely rare and is a big part of why this film still holds up. The film becomes even more interesting when you stop thinking about it simply as a story about style and start thinking about it also as a story about systems. Now, I'm not really specialized in politics, philosophy, or economy, so this is all coming from my personal experience and opinions. The famous Cerulean speech is one of the clearest examples for my point here.
And it's sort of comical how you think that you've made a choice that exempts you from the fashion industry when in fact you're wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room from a pile of stuff.
Miranda Point is not really about one color. It is about the illusion of choice. The speech explains how what appears to be an individual decision is actually the result of layers of cultural and economic influence. By the time a color reaches a bargain bin, it has already moved through a chains of decisions made by editors, designers, buyers, publicists, and marketers. That is one of the film's most important ideas. Fashion does not merely reflect desire, it manufactures it. It tells us what to want, when to want it, and how much should it cost. It creates the fantasy of personal taste while quietly organizing the boundaries of that taste in advance. Fashion is presented as creative, but also deeply commercial. It is an art form, but it is also a machine for producing status. The movie never lets us forget that beauty and exploitation are often in the same room. This is where the films become bigger than just a girl gets a makeover and moves past fashion. Andy's transformation is not just about becoming prettier or more polished. It is about entering a system where value is assigned, traded, and monitored. The world of runway is not neutral. It rewards discipline, access, speed, and obedience. It is glamorous, but it's also ruthless, and that ruthlessness extends beyond the characters. The film implies that consumers are not as independent as they think they are. We like to imagine that our choices are personal and expressive, but the movie reminds us that those choices could also be shaped by people and institutions that we rarely see. Fashion sells itself through aspiration, and aspiration is one of the most effective tools capitalism has. Even the idea of trickle-down fashion is built into the movie logic. What begins in elite fashion circles eventually appears in more accessible form somewhere else. The system depends on that flow. High fashion produces the image, and mass culture consumes the approximation. The whole structure is built on that distance. The film understands that very clearly. It does not present fashion as innocent self-expression.
I said to myself, go ahead. Take a chance. Hire the smart fat girl.
One of the most interesting things I found about The Devil Wears Prada is that it doesn't show that power is only corrupt in one person. It shows how powers change everyone around it. When we think of the devil, we think of Miranda. She is cold, demanding, and often cruel. She is also brilliant at her job. That combination is what makes her compelling. The film doesn't try to make us like her. It actually invites us to understand what kind of system produces someone like her and rewards her for surviving inside it. She is the purest expression of the values the industry worship: precision, control, ruthlessness, and performance. The devil is not just Miranda, it is the logic of the world she dominates. She is what happens when status becomes a moral system. She is what happens when professional success becomes a substitute for humanity. But the movie is smarter than a simple villain story. Andy is not separate from the system. She enters the job with distance, irony, and self-protection. She tells herself that she is above it and only there temporarily. But the longer she stays, the more she is entered by the place. She became faster, more polished, more effective, and more compromised. That is the film's real warning. Corruption does not always look like the sudden fall. Sometimes it looks like competence. Sometimes it looks like becoming better at the thing you once rejected. Andy's tragedy is not that she becomes Miranda. It is that she starts understanding Miranda logic.
Don't be ridiculous, Andrea. Everybody wants this. Everybody wants to be us.
Emily is also trapped in the system, but in a different way. She is more openly invested in it. She knows what the job demands and accepts it, even when it is unhealthy. Her entire life becomes organized around fashion-observed standards. That is part of what makes her character so effective. She is not naive, she is committed. But commitment in a system like this can become another form of self-erasure.
You don't deserve them. You eat carbs, for Christ's sake.
Nigel, too, is caught up in the machinery. He is talented, indispensable, and still vulnerable to exploitation. The film quietly reminds us that being good at the work does not protect you from being used by it. In fact, it often makes you easier to use. One of the most painful things about the film is how much of the character's life disappears into the job. Nobody at Runway seems to have a normal rhythm. Everyone is always on call. Everyone is always one crisis away from collapse. The place is brutal, and the film treats that pace as both observed and normalized. This is one of its sharpest observations. A glamorous industry can still run on exhaustion. It shows how total immersion in a high-pressure industry isolates people from their own life. Fashion becomes not just a profession, but a lifestyle that invades everything. This is why the movie remains so relevant. It is not only about the glamour of fashion, it is about the emotional and psychological cost of being inside an industry that rewards sacrifice.
I love my job. I love my job. I love my job.
And last but not least, everything couldn't have come together without the filmmaking to carry it. Director David Frankel keeps things moving with a kind of controlled lightness. The film feels breezy on the surface, while real pressure quietly builds underneath. We can instantly recall the iconic scenes, such as the getting ready montage, Miranda's first entrance, Andy's makeover, or the Paris sequences. According to IMDb and Shot on What, The Devil Wears Prada was shot entirely on 35mm and 16mm film celluloid, rather than being recorded digitally. This was filmed using Ericon Studio and Aton A Minima cameras, though the final footage was processed into a 2K digital intermediate for editing and theater distribution. This is one of the reasons why The Devil Wears Prada still feels visually rich. The texture of celluloid gives the image softer highlights, deeper tonal transitions, and a more organic sense of depth that many digital productions from today still struggle to replicate. But beyond the technical aspect, I also think films, in general, do not need to look perfectly realistic. Cinema has always been a form of stylization and escapism. A film should feel like entering someone else's perspective, not simply reproducing reality as accurately as possible. That's why the visual identity of The Devil Wears Prada works so well for me. Its world feels heightened, elegant, and cinematic without losing emotional clarity. But none of these things could have happened without a good script. The film balances seriousness and wit extremely well. It doesn't become a lecture, but it also doesn't represent empty entertainment. A lesser film would either preach too much or glamorize the system too much. This one does neither. It keeps the audience entertained while quietly showing them how the machinery works. The Devil Wears Prada gives us a glamorous world, but it never lets us forget the cost of it. It gives us unforgettable costume, but also uses the costume to talk about hierarchy and control. It gives us the devil, but it also shows us the system that made the devil useful. That is why the films still feel alive, not because it perfectly represents fashion, but because it has an understanding of fashion role in culture. It understands that style is never only aesthetic, it is social, it is economic, it is political, and in this film, it is also a language of power. 20 years on, the world Miranda represented has changed. The old gatekeeping model, centralized, hierarchical, handed down from above, has largely scattered. Fashion authority now lives across a million individual feeds and followings. Whether that's genuine liberation or just a more sophisticated version of the same machine is, I think it is still an open question. The cerulean speech didn't stop being true because the fashion press lost its grip. The influence just got harder to trace. Maybe that's exactly why revisiting the first film still feels worthwhile. Thank you once again for watching this video. If you found the videos helpful, please click the like and subscribe button, and even maybe drop a comment sharing your thoughts. I made this video purely from my own knowledge and opinions, so if there are any corrections, don't hesitate to let me know as well. We're here to learn something new from each other, right? And as usual, I'll see you guys in the next video. And in the meantime, take care of yourself.